Metropolitan State University is celebrating 50 years of championing access to higher education in Minnesota. Our first 50 years, Metropolitan State Oral History Project, produced by Metro State University in partnership with the Other Media Group, is a 4-part podcast series featuring first-hand accounts of experiences and stories from Metro State alumni, current and retired staff and faculty, and community members over the past 50 years. This podcast was made possible in part by the people of Minnesota through a grant funded by an appropriation to the Minnesota Historical Society from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Any views, findings, opinions, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Historical Society, the Minnesota Historic Resources Advisory Committee, or Metropolitan State University. Today's conversation topic is receiving credit for prior learning at Metro State University with alumna and retired staff member Joyce LeClaire, retired faculty member Danielle Abebe, 1974 alumna and current academic advisor Marcia Anderson, 1973 alumna Julia Eszlinger, 1980 alumnus Jaffe, and 2008 alumnus Ochen Kaylan.
I'm Joyce LeClaire, and I'm a 75 graduate of Metro State and actually retired from Metro State as Dean of Student Services and Advising in 97. I'd really like to hear from the alums, and I wonder if you would mind starting, Ochen.
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Ochen Kalin. I am an alum. I graduated in 2008. I've also stayed connected to the university. I've served on the alumni board and on the foundation board as well. So I went to Metro State because I wanted to change careers. I was pretty far along in my career at the time, but wanted to change careers. I wanted to go into law, which meant going to law school, but I didn't have an undergrad degree to be able to go to law school. And so I went to Metro State to get my undergrad degree. And so I did. I got my undergrad degree. I then went to law school. I graduated law school. I was very fortunate to do very well and had an opportunity to work with a national law firm, which I did. I was a litigator for a number of years. And then started my own law firm that specializes in working with artists and nonprofits. So it's a career that was completely blocked to me because I didn't have an undergrad degree. And the idea of doing a 4-year sort of traditional undergrad degree and then doing 3 years of law school to do a career change was just pretty impossible. And when I was looking at places to do it, Metro really was the only place that was flexible enough that seemed like it was possible to do. So I really do owe my entire career to Metro and to the flexibility that it provides students.
What a great story. Julia, you are a pioneer amongst all of us as one of the very first graduating class at Metro State. Would you share some of your experiences and story?
I'm Julia Eszlinger Jensen. I graduated from Metro State in the first class, and that was in 1972 or 1973, with Dr. Sweet and Dr. Mitau. At the time, I was working for the State Department of Vocational Education. My background is nursing. I graduated from a 3-year nursing program. When I graduated from high school, I wanted to go into nursing. My parents wanted me to go to a 4-year school immediately to get a degree. I wanted it my way, which was get into a 3-year program right away so I could experience and do stuff, thinking I could get my degree after that. Then I saw the incredible challenge that a nurse who did not have a degree had in going back to get her degree or his degree. It meant high costs as far as tuition. 4-year programs did not accept anything that was taught other than in their own institutions. That's the rigidity of nursing and of some of the higher education systems. So I knew that I could not advance without a degree. And then I was working for the state, and I heard about what Dr. Sweet and Dr. Mittal were doing. The legislature had been funding them for quite some time, I'm not sure how many years, in order to get their concept started of using experience. And so they were determined to start getting students and graduating them as soon as possible. And with that, I joined as a student, brought umpteen boxes of evidence of everything that I had done, because I had also been in Montana. I did everything through the oral interview of many, many sessions. And I think I had about 5 or 6 2 or 3 hour sessions of verifying and being questioned by the staff of everything that I've done, because it was hard even for the staff to accept the fact that I would not be taking any classes. They wanted to get some graduates in there just as soon as possible. So after dragging about 20-some boxes up to the second floor of Walgreens drugstore and umpteen sessions of oral interview, finally Dr. Holmberg said, she was interrogated more than I ever was to get my PhD. And so eventually, I don't know how they decided. They probably went in some back room over a period of days and decided that I would qualify to graduate. So I was in the first class of 12, and I often said, as Dr. Sweet and his 12, it truly was the university without walls. We had our graduation at Central Baptist Church in St. Paul.
I think the 75 graduation was there too when we were accredited, if I remember right. Big old stone church.
Beautiful church.
Yeah. Jay, how about you?
My name is Jay Jaffe. I graduated from Metro State in 1980. I guess I got to go back to the 60s when I first went to college to explain why Metro State played such an important part in my life. I went to the University of Pennsylvania to the Wharton School of Finance and Commerce, and I was going to become an accountant because that's what my vocational aptitude test said and my family said. And I grew up in a family retail business, and it was expected. I was the oldest grandchild. My grandfather had started it. I was the heir apparent from my generation. It was all laid out, and I screwed it up. I bombed out at the University of Pennsylvania. I took about 8 or 9 years of just doing weird stuff and odd jobs and trying to figure out what I wanted to do and who I was going to be. And I finally decided that I wanted to go back to school and get my degree, that life wasn't going to be that great if I didn't have it. And I heard about Metro State, and I remember the office was in the basement of the IDS Center at the time that I got connected. So I went down there and talked to some people, and they were very encouraging, and I started the process. And originally I thought I might go into law school, Ochen, like you did. But I'd had this experience in the family business. It went bankrupt, and it was just a horrible experience, a very ugly experience. And I had decided I never wanted to be in any form of the business world ever again. And I realized that even though I wanted to be a storefront lawyer, there was still going to be a business connection to being a lawyer. So I ended up having to change my degree plan, and I had to amend 23 of my 24 amendments. Working with Mel, and he was great and really supportive. And I ended up with a focus on counseling and public education. To make a long story short, I was working in an office products company doing shipping and receiving, and I heard on the radio that a place called the Farmhouse was looking for volunteer phone counselors. And Metro State required an internship at the time, and I hadn't figured out what that was going to be. And I called the Farmhouse, that's PH, like pharmacology, and asked if they would supervise an internship. And they said, well, let's talk about it. So got the internship. It led to a job at the Farmhouse before I even graduated. And it led to a 35-year career working in substance abuse prevention. The last 19 years, I was chemical health coordinator at the Minnesota Department of Health. I retired in 2013. The thing about Metro that I loved was that I needed to be someplace where there were adults who wanted to be in school, not kids who were there because it was expected of them. And that's what I found. And I found just a phenomenal faculty that interacted with us, and the classes were so interactive. It was just fabulous and just a wonderful experience.
That's a great story. And I think Marcia has such a wide background in being a student, community faculty, and then on the staff at Metro State, that you can come at this from so many perspectives, can't you, Marcia?
Yes, thanks, Joyce. I've worn most of the hats. I joke with our current president, telling her I haven't been president yet, but I have had a lot of other roles, starting wonderfully with being a student. So I started as a student I'm Marcia Anderson. I started as a student in 1974 and graduated in 77. I came as a transfer student, as we all did at that time, from a private liberal arts school. And I had gone there for 2 years right out of high school. And it was, as we said at the time, irrelevant. Because it was during the Vietnam War and the women's movement and the environmental movement. And nothing about that was in the classes or even barely on the campus. And so I was then the editor of the newspaper, and it was just totally out of sync with me. So I dropped out. I was a dropout. And I was in journalism at the time, and I didn't think I would ever go back to school because you didn't need a degree to be in journalism. I was a working journalist. Similar to Joyce, when I was a student, it was so small in 74 and 75 and 76 that I, knew a lot of the faculty and staff. And I was also asked to do what was then a consulting contract in 1976 to help with the publications. It was like nothing was going to stop me then. I was committed to Metro, and I've had multiple roles in multiple job descriptions ever since, with the bulk of my time in admissions for 12 years, then advising in the College of Individualized Studies, and then most recently as coordinator, advisor, and now director of student-directed learning. And over all of that time, I've also been a community faculty member.
Danielle, are you the only one that hasn't been a student at Metro?
I was just completing my doctoral degree at the University of Minnesota in adult education, interestingly. And interestingly, there was vacancy notice for the individualized degree program. They were looking for a faculty member for a position in the Perspective Center. And then I said, wow, I didn't know you guys existed here. I mean, it was at in downtown office. And of course, Joyce was my first boss, my first, she hired me. But I did not know Metro existed, honestly speaking, at that time. But when I did come, I had a chance to visit with Bob Fox, and he sat me in the office and started describing. I said, well, this is what I have been trained for. And I'm so happy that I was able to connect with you guys and come to work here. And the search committee, interestingly, they interviewed me in the afternoon. Before I got to my office back at Hamlin, where I was working at the time, I got a phone call and said, you're the only name we're going to be forwarding to the dean. And I'm telling you, it's the most significant, enriching, and probably rewarding career that anyone could ever imagine. Metro State was just a place that I have found, you students talked about how much life-changing your experience was, and you could imagine for me, everything I was trained for, everything that I thought about, just came just merged together. And so it's been a very beautiful, rewarding career that I had at Metro State, and I lasted almost 30 years. It's just been wonderful for me, and there's not a day gone by without running into somebody that the stories you heard from Jay and Ochen and Julia, that they will tell you, we found Metropolitan State. This has been just a life-changing place for me. And that's what this institution was. And that's what I have experienced for all these years. People came, really get transformed because other institutions, that's not what they experienced. But at Metro State, that was now. So it's been a wonderful connection for me.
I like how you coined that we get transformed, and it isn't just the students; it's the faculty and the staff too. It's some kind of a different commitment, and I think those of us who are around early years, do you remember feeling the tension between the so-called traditional institutions and places like Metro State? I mean, we were really pioneers in the field of education at that time. And I can remember when I went for my master's at St. Cloud, they didn't know what the heck to do with a narrative transcript. In spite of all the stuff that I had done and studied, I still had to take all these workshops in writing. I had written and published a book, but I had to take a workshop in writing to prove I was able to do graduate level work. And then going to the University of Minnesota for my doctorate, they said, even though I had a degree from St. Cloud, they said, well, I think we'll have you take the Miller's analogy. And then I did that and got a great score. And they said, well, we'll have you take the GRE. And got a good score on that. Was finally provisionally admitted to the doctoral program. So, I mean, those are some of the challenges. Did any of you more recent students have that? Or even you, Julie, how did you experience?
I had a terrible experience because I was going to be in nursing and get my degree and move up in nursing. And I had taken, in my 3-year program, I had taken many college classes. And then after I was working, I also took extension classes at the College of Great Falls when I was living there and at the University of Minnesota. Now when I applied to the University of Minnesota, they would not, the nursing program, they would not accept any of my credits unless the profs of who I took the course from would approve and acknowledge that they were university level and could transfer. I did all of that and brought it back. And they looked at me and said to me, oh, I can't believe that they did that. And did not accept me. And so I just thought, I'll be loyal to the practice of nursing, but I don't know that I'll ever be loyal to nursing as an educational way to go beyond. And so I knew that I had to have a degree in order to continue my life as I wanted to. And so that's when I went to Metro U, and then truly, when I went to my master's at St. Thomas University, it's like everybody was questioning the credibility of Metro State at that time. If it was really a credible university, we had to do a lot of justification. The best thing that ever happened is when the university became accredited, because now they could at least look at something that might be equal. But before that, it's like everybody was questioning if it really was a credible university.
Well, things changed. How about you more recent graduates? Did you have special challenges with a Metro degree, or did you find it more acceptable?
I had a little bit of, so I went to Metro, I got my degree there, and then applied for law school. And I won't say the name of the law school, but it's a well-respected Minnesota law school. And they had never accepted anyone from Metro State. They had a side eye to that institution. And also my degree was in individualized studies. And I think they maybe wondered, did he just spend 4 years basket weaving and now he's expecting to come to law school? And so there was a little bit of sort of justification in showing the work and showing my grades and how I did well there. They accepted me, but you could tell there was a little bit of a sort of, we'll see how this works out. It fortunately didn't take long until my law school grades started coming in and they saw that I could handle it. But it was strange to have to do that. I will say that I think by the time I graduated, they had a better idea that Metro State could put out, really high quality graduates. And so, to whatever extent I was able to play a part in that, I'm really happy to do that. Metro State is still in the process of making itself known and respected. And I don't think that's anything about what Metro is doing. I think it really is just about perception outside of Metro.
I heard the story that David Sweet and Ted Mitow proposed this different kind of university, and they did a great job of it because there were so many students who had dropped out and wanted to finish a degree, and they'd go to the U and were turned away. But secretly, I've been told, Ted Mitow and David Sweet wanted a state university in the Twin Cities. And they figured, incrementally you get your foot in the door and it will grow. And it has. Certainly it has. So, I don't hear those stories that some of us experienced anymore from students. One of the high points was a group of students that I became very friendly with, and one of them, his name was Ted, got accepted into graduate school at Harvard, and we all celebrated because we thought we finally broke the barrier of this. Jay, how was your experience?
Well, it's funny because when you said, how about the recent graduates, and you said plural, and I've never thought of myself as a recent graduate since I graduated in 1980, but since Ochen and I are the only ones that didn't graduate in the 1970s, I'm a recent graduate because everything's relative. My struggle, and I embraced it, was explaining to other people in my life, people that I knew personally, people that I came in contact with socially, what Metro State was and how it worked and why it was so valuable to me. And I'd like to believe that I probably sent a few students to Metro State because of my talking about it, my experiences. But I went into a field just primarily because of my internship that I'd never thought of. It was a brand new field. The chemical dependency field was really just getting started in the 70s and 80s, and it was flying by the seat of its pants. So if somebody knew how to take breath and had some experience, we were welcomed. And because of my experience in my internship, I was very welcomed, and there was never any question about the credibility of the coursework I did or the experiential work I did or the internship. It was great. And I worked with a lot of Metro State graduates throughout the years in the field.
Just to complement the conversation regarding the public perception out there. And one of the big jobs that we have at Metro State was to advise students. And that's because of the advising load, sometimes our teaching was not as big as regular schools. And so one of the privileges that I had is to get to talk to counselors or admissions people or faculty members in a department somewhere where students are not having some success convincing what the transcript meant, what their education really meant. And oftentimes that's one of the best moments in my experience, because I start by talking about what does it mean to be an educated person. We expose our students to think about what it means to be educated. As adults, they have to start to imagine how their life could be shaped by this education, not so much by a collection of classes, but what they truly need as part of their own personal life journey. Mel Henderson was the best. I mean, Mel Henderson can talk to anybody. They start wandering toward Metro to take classes themselves. That's how good Mel Henderson was. And so it's just a matter of posing the questions to these counselors to understand how students were able to shape this experience. Not just taking collection of courses because they have to, but because they want to.
You bring up a really good point, Danielle, and it's how we were shaped and what our experiences were at Metro that helped us become who we are. When I think of a traditional classroom as I knew it back when I was growing up, and the experience I had at Metro of a class that was designed by Carol Holmberg and Janet Hagberg, and it was Women in Madness, and it was about literature and women who had mental issues, who were either authors or who were written about. But the subtitle was, "What do you say to a crazy lady?" And the class was actually in Carol Holmberg's living room. I just remember there was maybe only 12 of us, plus Janet and Carol. And we had coffee and we sat on the floor. And there was such a camaraderie between instructor and student and such permission that I to learn and to explore that I don't think you would ever find in a traditional classroom, which was so inspiring. And I'm just wondering what experiences the rest of you have had, whether it was at a student or faculty or staff member that you hang on to and really inspired growth and change in you.
For me, it wasn't while I was at Metro State. It was after I had gone through the questioning and gotten my degree. And sometime after that, Dr. Holmberg and some of the female faculty got some of us women graduates together at a luncheon at the University Club. And it was the most refreshing thing to be almost like an equal, although not an equal, as far as education with them. And it was very rewarding to be so accepted and to be kind of considered one of them.
Yeah, I think that's characteristic of Metro, is that even in a classroom setting, whether it was community faculty or regular faculty, it was a learning community, not just faculty and student. How about some of you others?
This is Jay. I was going to mention most every class I recall was just a wonderful experience because, again, it was adults with adults, whether it was the instructors or the students, and we were all there because we wanted to be there. They were all evening classes. Most all of us had worked all day. We had other responsibilities, and it was such a great opportunity to just share and exchange and learn from each other. And I remember in particular two of them, but I don't want to say the others weren't just as important. These two just stand out. One was a philosophy course I took, and it was at the Quaker Friends meeting home on Summit Avenue. And it was like 10 or 11 people sitting around talking about philosophy, and it was phenomenal. And I can't tell you who the instructor was because I don't recall. I could probably look at my narrative transcript. And then the other one was I took a counseling class with Al Lipp, who Al was just, he threw me off at first. I was trying to figure this man out, and I became so attached to him. And one of the things he had us do was go out and do practice sessions with friends and neighbors. And that was just such a good experience to do that before I had to go do it for real, if you forgive the vernacular. But I really came to love Al. What a great instructor.
How about you, Marcia? from either side or any of all the many sides you were at Metro.
I'll talk about being a student first. Because in preparation for this interview, I went and searched my files and I found my transcript, which is a packet of materials that describe all of the learning outcomes that we had to write the learning outcomes. Joyce has hers too. It refreshed my memory because it's been a while. I recalled that I didn't take very many classes. We didn't have very many classes at Metro in the early days. They were called group learning opportunities anyway, GLOWs. Yes. And so I found from reading my transcript that I only took 4. I needed 17 competencies. I only took 4 classes at Metro. I took 3 at the U of M, which transferred in as what was then called for a while, recording of other institutional learning, or royals. Yeah. So those were 2 formats. And then because I was a working journalist in community journalism in the Twin Cities, so I earned 5 prior learning assessments, 2 of which were kind of hybrids with some independent study with them. You could be anywhere on the continuum of having prior learning that was ready for assessment or that you needed to add something to, and I had both of those formats. And those prior learning assessments were in things like reporting and editing and graphic design and photography. And then a highlight was that I applied for and was selected for a competitive internship at the Minneapolis Tribune, the morning paper at the time. I was the first student who was not from the U of M for that internship. Going back to the credibility issue, they were not sure about me, but it was the 1970s, so they were trying to be a little bit open and progressive, and so they brought me on, and I that was a fabulous experience. I did multiple articles, including a couple of spreads in the then Sunday Picture magazine, and I covered a David Sweet speech. So I have that article in my collection, and I did all that while I had mono, and so that was an experience in daily newspapering on multiple levels, which convinced me I didn't really want to work for a daily newspaper. So it was significant. So I had all of those kinds of formats in my degree plan, and I also had not quite as many amendments, Jay, but I did have a few amendments in order to evolve my degree plan as I went through. So those were some of the highlights. The other highlight was having Chet Myers, as founding faculty, as my advisor. And Chet was able to both be very receptive to all the ideas that his advisees brought that they wanted to do and work on, and nudge us to completion, definitely honoring the learning that students were doing in all the aspects of their lives, including personal and spiritual, which was a theme of Chet's that I think was, again, another unusual thing about Metro's philosophy, is that it wasn't only about work and major preparation. It was about all aspects of your life as a learner, supporting you to be more of a lifelong learner.
Really neat. What about you, Danielle? What a memory you have in either the classroom or helping a student, or even an awareness that you got as a faculty member?
Well, the classroom has always been, for me, I think, is where I experience the most exciting moments, because we really trying to grapple with this one particular question, what it means to be an educated person. At the end of this journey, what students come up is just amazing. A lot of their experiences are shaped by what other institutions have provided, not so much what they sat down and thought about their own lived experience. And for the first time, they are now putting it together. I mean, I had students who've been in 2-3 institutions, never quite landed where they want to land. And for me, the most exciting thing is when they finally get convinced this is the right place for them, and this is where they actually pull all these things together, make some meaning out of, things like, people usually know history, sociology, social science. Those are the majors that they come out of. Here we are saying to them, well, take a look at your degree plan. Take a look at all the courses that you are thinking about, all the courses you design yourself as an independent study, all the experiences you like to have, internship, student design, independent study. I teach 2 or 3 perspectives classes, and you can imagine 32 students, 28 students in each class, and the stories that I get every time is just amazing. And my hope is that someday I would sit down and reflect on them in my memoirs, perhaps. So it's just that classroom, that innovative, that educated person journey that people take, and what happens to them at the end of that journey, and more importantly, what happens to them now that they are associated with an institution that honors who they are as a human being, honors what they bring in their education, and honors what their future is going to be like. And nowhere in other institutions where they found themselves at the center of the institution's thinking.
That's just an excellent story, Danielle. It makes me realize that at Metro, you have to think about your education. You have to think about your goals. It isn't just a prescribed list of classes, gen eds that you have to take, although, we did have basic kinds of knowledge that's required, but it's so it makes you have a kind of commitment that doesn't happen in other institutions. I'm wondering, what's the most unusual learning experience, whether it was a student-designed independent study or a prior competence or something that each of you had or heard about or helped experience at Metro State?
For me, it was proving, especially the liberal arts part of it. And fortunately, for some reason, the higher power, she had me save everything. So I had all of the courses that I taught in nursing. I was teaching nursing courses even without a degree because the people that hired me knew that I knew what was going on. I taught disaster nursing, so I brought all of that curricula. And I brought all the tests that I wrote. I brought how all the instructors had evaluated me and how the faculty had evaluated me and my supervisors. I had all of this stuff, which is why I had 23 or 24 boxes of material. Then I was also a member of the Guthrie Theater, and I attended plays, and I also had orchestra hall tickets. So I brought all of those programs and books and showed them and wrote a summary of what I thought of each one of those. That's how I got through the liberal arts part of it, and also some of the art that I saw and had written about. And for some reason, it was just something I was doing in my life without knowing it would actually lead me to prove that I can get a baccalaureate degree and move on in my life with the things I needed to do. So it was a challenge, but you just have to be up to meet the challenge if you're really caring and interested in doing it.
Others of you, Jay, unusual learning experience you had or were familiar with?
In a way, it was all unusual, and yet it was all so rewarding. When I went to school, the first 2 years of college, as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, the hierarchical division between the people standing up and talking at me versus coming to Metro State as a 30-year-old, it was people talking with me, and that was so respectful and so very different, and I was so engaged rather than furiously taking notes as an 18-year-old hoping that I would pass the test. So the unusual aspect was the interactive education, but the one most unusual that I think of is I remember there was a push to take something that was not academic, but something more recreational or more life fulfilling. And so I'd always wanted to play the piano. That's what I took, and I was horrible. Just horrible. And every week I would go to the instructor's house and sit down at his piano. And so it was a really unusual thing to do as a part of my education. But I'm so glad I did it, because I found out that it's just not something I'm ever going to do. But that doesn't mean I can't greatly appreciate people who can play the piano. And I hadn't thought about it till I pulled out my narrative transcript, as you talked about, Marcia, and read through it, and I went, oh yeah, I did do that.
Talk about culture, the institutional culture, and how student-centeredness was so special to many of the faculty. In the early days, at least when I came, we all had a more focused passion about the work that we were doing. I mean, we were interested in zeroing on the students, helping the students go through the process and making sure that they achieve their objective. But as the institution grows, of course, departments started to think about more narrowly about their programs and stuff like that. But at that time, all of us, I mean, about 20-some of us were on the faculty. It was a very small population of people. But all of us were focused on a particular mission. And some of you probably remember the 5 tenets. I really felt I should commit myself to these tenets. I mean, they are the cornerstone of how our educational experience should be guided, both for the students and for the teachers. I really honestly felt that students should have the authority over and responsibility for their education, period. They and only they should decide. And everybody shared that.
Marcia, what kind of unusual learning experience did you have or guided students through?
Well, I actually want to go back to a similar story to what Jay said, to kind of explain the arc of my thinking in my career that's rooted in Metro. I was at a private liberal arts school, so it was also a very traditional environment. And when I first went there out of high school, I thought I was going to prepare to become a high school teacher. That was my goal. I went to my first education class and found that the philosophy being presented about education, which was kind of socialize students to being in society, was not a match with mine, and I dropped that class. But I was still in the education program, and that January term, I found out about a class in the Twin Cities about open schools and free schools, and which was the innovation at the time in K through 12. And I asked the education department to let me take that class in the education department, and they flatly refused. So that's an example of the traditionalism that existed at the time, and I was kind of blown away, and they told me to go to the political science department. So they saw these innovations as political. And so I did go to the political science department, and they approved it. So I had a great introduction led by Tom O'Connell, the same person that led Danielle to Metro. That experiential learning, right, of that whole interchange taught me that I maybe didn't want to be a high school teacher at that time. While I was a journalist, I interviewed somebody who was interning for the Mendota Heights City Council, and he was doing an internship from Metro State, and I didn't know about Metro State. So I asked him, well, what about this? And he said, well, this is a place where you can get credit for what you're doing, like I'm getting this internship credit, and credit for what you've already learned, and it's all adults, and you get to talk to the faculty. And I said, really? And I called the next day. And I had not been expecting to go back to college. Like I said, I didn't really need a degree in journalism. But that sounded like my philosophy. It turned out to be the case. It was a great match with my values and a great match with the kind of innovations of student-centered learning, like Danielle said, and active learning and engaged learning and recognizing learning wherever it is going on and assessing it so that people can get credit for it and actually graduate that way. That was all in line with what I was interested in. And so I had found my home. I had found my intellectual home, and a home that would not only, fit my values, but also keep letting me be a learner and open to learning and lifelong learning, and help others do that too. I mean, the liberating effect of being in a place that supports your learning and your initiative to learn is amazing, and so contrary to traditional, faculty-directed education. I'm just amazed still, after all this time. Traditional higher education is still a lot that way. Metro still has this culture, as Danielle said, just the reality that if you're a teacher at Metro, if you're a faculty member at Metro, you can't talk for an hour because students will be raising their hands saying, but my experience is, or just a minute, I have a question about that because in my workplace, so our students have always been right there with that kind of disruption of the hierarchy. And I think that student-centeredness and allowing that ethic to be primary has been what has made Metro State the place that draws adult students and students who want to think for themselves, as Danielle said about our first tenet, which gives students the authority and responsibility let me back up. I read it again because it was in my IEP class materials that I found. It's not gives students, it's vests in students the authority and responsibility for their own education and learning.
There's another piece of that, Marcia, that also speaks to how innovative the faculty and the culture at Metro is. I'd be remiss if I didn't say there weren't issues. How do we evaluate this? When someone presented for a competency, you have to have a theoretical base to your knowledge. Out of that was born the theory workshops, where students who had great experience and a great depth of experience but didn't know the theoretical underpinnings. That was an example how the staff and faculty at Metro listened to students, the commitment to community, whether it's your immediate or your city, state, or world community, but that's part of being a lifelong learner, is to have that kind of commitment, which is the beauty of Metro, is that it is an individualized plan that you design, and so you're responsible for, too, in some sense. You own it. How did it feel? I think, both probably Marcia and Julia, when you got credit for your life work experience.
My first impulse was, I think I deserve it because of the struggles that I had. And then secondly, it's like unbelievable that these people who drilled me for how many days and hours actually adopted and changed my life forever. It's like now I can move on with everything else that I want to do, and I don't have to worry about money. I don't have to worry about working and going to school. I can keep moving forward. And at the time, I was also in the Air National Guard as a flight nurse, and that was during Vietnam, so I was able to do some of but I could have done those things anyway. It just freed me up to move along with my life instead of scheduling classes here and arranging my budget for this, and it just freed up my life, and it was like, I absolutely cannot believe it. It was a wonderful feeling.
You did it. They simply validated it. They validated what you already did and knew, which was a real gift. How about you, Marcia?
I had the same kind of emotional reactions as Julie. I did expect that I should get credit because I felt competent, and the notion was competence. I looked back at the syllabus for the first class, the Individualized Educational Planning course, and in it was this definition of competence. I actually have notes from that first class, and they said, what matters is what you know about and what you can do, not how you learned it. And that's what they were going to be asking us to demonstrate. What did we know and what could we do, and how could we demonstrate it? Along with that was the theory component that we had to think about. I mean, one of the things that is innovative about that approach is that it has the student articulate what they know, and the student has to articulate how they can show what they know, show and talk about what they know, so that it's in the student's head, really embedded, and there's this metacognition around it. You have to think about your thinking, think about your learning. That is, again, a totally different approach than a faculty member saying, this is what you ought to know, and I'll test whether you know it. But it creates this cycle of what is competence articulation and competence building in the process of articulating your competence, and then confidence building. And so that confidence building made me feel credible as a learner, credible as somebody who could be self-directed in my learning, be a lifelong learner, and take on other learning projects with confidence, because I knew how to do the planning and the articulation and set the standards for myself.
I feel like I used maybe every alternative learning strategy that Metro offers. I took some equivalency tests and then transferred those in, which was a huge help. It's actually one of the things that really sets Metro apart, in that the number of credits you can transfer in that way. At least when I was doing my program, Metro allowed you to transfer in a maximum of 60 credits that way. 60, right? With 2 years worth of school. I looked, and at the time, at least, the University of Minnesota would allow you to transfer 6 credits that way. When you transfer in credits that way, you don't get the tuition fees. And that is really a way that Metro walks the walk, that they're really about student success. Every college says that they're about the student, but when you see policies like that, you really, you get to learn which organizations are really about the students. Like many students, I was an adult. I did my own, I've been a lifelong learner before Metro and at Metro and since Metro. And so I was able to take just CLEP tests, just equivalency tests, pass those, transfer in those credits. And so I transferred in, I think, something like 52 credits that way. I challenged courses. Basically, if there was a course that seemed to align with some previous work that I had done or previous studying that I had done, I would challenge the course. And in that case, you would write up like your justification, like Marcia was just talking about, having to justify your own, experience and sort of notate your own experience. And then I met with the professor of that particular course. We had coffee. We had a great conversation. And at the end of it, he said, okay, I want you to just like write one article on this particular topic and you'll be good. And so I wrote that article, and then I got credits that way. Marcia did an incredible job helping me figure out, like, how do I line up all of these things? How do the timelines work? What are these alternative learning strategies that we can use? Daniel was also hugely helpful in helping me figure out how that lines up with a degree. And it wasn't the traditional way. It wasn't the sort of conveyor belt way that a lot of schools work. They saw me as an individual. They saw that I had goals and that I had needs, that I had, a particular background, and really worked so hard to figure out how to make me successful, how to make this process successful, and along the way, how I could help the community, help the organization. It's a very rare educational organization that just completely walks the walk of being really focused on student success. If the student's successful, that's a win. And it's amazing to be a part of that type of organization.
A lot of our students come in with having already thought about what they want in their education and having already been, like you said, a lifelong learner.
Metro challenges you when you first come there to define what is an educated person and then to plan how you're going to live that out. The thing that happens, though, with traditional education, you graduate and you go on. I find that the challenge to define myself as an educated person never went away. The curiosity is always there. My kids laugh because as we're in a conversation, whether it be on the phone or in person, and they say, I wonder, and I have my iPad out and I'm checking out the resources to get the answer to the question. And I feel that way about everything. And I'm challenged with the misinformation that we get today in the media to get to the bottom of it. And to this innate curiosity forever. And I love it. I'm 84 years old, and I will never lose that wonderful commitment to keep learning and the wonderful curiosity that Metro really made come alive in me. So I'm very grateful for that. I can't help but think of what an impact graduates of Metro State will have on the broader community as the numbers grow and grow and grow. You guys have been such a treat to visit with. It was so much fun to see people from my past and to hear again the wonderful things that happened at Metro and the wonderful people that are associated with it. So you guys sure made my day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You made ours too.
Yes. Thank you.
Our first 50 years, Metropolitan State Oral History, is a limited scope oral history project made possible in part by the people of Minnesota through a grant funded by an appropriation to the Minnesota Historical Society from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Any views, findings, opinions, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Historical Society, the Minnesota Historic Resources Advisory Committee, or Metropolitan State University. We'd like to thank our participants and alumni for sharing their stories. These include Marcia Anderson, Leah Harvey, Jim Lukashevsky, Susan Rydell, Karen Sweet, Mel Henderson, Butch Kramer, Awu Ahmed, Anissa Hajimanen, Lucky Lee, Ki Yang, Joyce LeClaire, Danielle Abebe, Julia Eszlinger, Jay Jaffe, Ochen Kaylan, and partner Halil Lee of the Other Media Group. We would also like to thank Emily Seddon, Sai Chang, Christine Hansen, and Majed Mohammed for their technical and administrative support.